Welcome to Sleepverse, a quiet corner of YouTube where stories move slowly, voices stay soft, and the night feels a little gentler. If you enjoy calm bedtime tales, peaceful narrations, and dreamy moments to help you rest, you're in the right place. Before we begin, I invite you, softly and without hurry, to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps this sleepy space grow, and it lets me bring you many more calming stories every week. And I'd love to get to know you better. So, whenever you feel comfortable, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? How do these stories help you relax? What kind of bedtime tale should I create next? Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for joining this peaceful journey. Now, get comfortable, breathe slowly, and let the night carry you into rest. On a quiet night, when the world has settled into stillness, a gentle story can guide the mind toward rest. Tonight's tale drifts back to a softer time, long before clocks and schedules, when people watched shadows, stars, candles, and even water to understand the day. Their methods were simple, uncertain, and often quietly chaotic, yet somehow peaceful in their own way. So take a slow breath. Let the day loosen its hold. Allow this calm, dreamy journey to unfold at a gentle pace. This is the soft story of how people once tried to tell time, and how time, patiently and kindly, carried them along anyway. On a gentle evening long before the age of humming machines, bright screens, or ticking clocks, the world moved in a rhythm that almost felt like a slow, drifting dream. Time itself had a different texture then, softer, looser, almost shy in the way it showed itself. People lived inside a quieter universe, where every hour seemed to stretch a little longer, and the air itself held a calmness that moved like a sleepy breeze across the land. In this old, unrushed world, there were no hands circling on a dial, no numbers glowing on a wall, and no alarms whispering for anyone to wake. Instead, time passed like a gentle river that didn't hurry, flowing with its own uncertain purpose. And in the middle of this peaceful, unmeasured life, people had to find small, curious ways to understand when a moment had arrived or when another was softly slipping away. The evenings in that world were particularly serene, as if the sky itself understood the stillness people needed. Soft amber light poured across open fields, stretching into quiet villages dotted with homes made from wood, clay, and a kind of craftsmanship that felt slow and thoughtful. Each home carried a warmth that spread into the air, blending with the hush of fading daylight. In this calm atmosphere, the narrator, quiet, observant, and unhurried, drifted through scenes of daily life, noticing how people, without clocks, relied on shadows and senses to understand their days. There is something soothing in watching them, as if they had mastered the art of moving gently through the world without ever feeling the need to rush. Shadows were one of the first guides of time. Long, stretching silhouettes in the morning would slowly grow shorter as the sun rose higher, like a calm inhalation of the sky. People would watch the ground with a soft kind of curiosity, noticing how their shadows slowly folded inward as noon approached. It wasn't a precise system, but it felt almost poetic, a quiet understanding between light and life. And though it rarely worked perfectly, no one seemed particularly bothered by the small uncertainties. Time, after all, was more of a companion than a ruler back then, drifting alongside them with an easy patience. Some days, however, The sky would cover itself with soft gray clouds, thick enough to hide the sun and confuse the shadows entirely. On those days, people simply shrugged and continued their tasks with a peaceful acceptance that time might be taking a small nap. Without a sharp need to measure anything, they allowed the day to move as it wished. Even the animals of the village played their own small part in this natural, gentle rhythm. Roosters called out in the early morning, stretching their voices into the quiet dawn. Birds chirped in soft patterns that marked the slow passing of daylight, and the sleepy, low sounds of evening creatures hinted at the night settling in. Each creature had its own way of marking time, and though none of them were exact, together they created a soft chorus that guided people without ever insisting. There was a certain comfort in watching all of this unfold. Time, though wobbly and imperfect, felt kind and warm. People seemed to live inside a blanket of natural rhythms, not perfectly stitched, but held together with a soft, dreamlike patience. As the narrator wandered quietly past the fields and pathways of this earlier world, they observed other ancient methods of time-keeping slowly coming into view. Some people trusted the sky itself, gazing upwards to see where the sun floated in its long, lazy arc. Mornings shone with golden freshness, afternoons glowed with a gentle haze, and evenings held an amber softness that signaled the approaching night. Even without clocks, the sky told its own slow, peaceful story. On certain evenings, when the world dimmed into its nighttime hush, the stars began to stretch across the sky like silver dust scattered with intention. Some of the stars moved in subtle patterns, drifting toward certain positions that people had learned to read. They used constellations as markers, whispering among themselves that a particular star sitting above a certain hill meant a certain hour had quietly arrived. It wasn't exact, but it was beautifully calm, and the sky always seemed patient as people attempted to read its gentle hints. This world without clocks carried a charm that settled lightly on every moment. Without the pressure of minutes or seconds, life unfolded at a slower pace, soft and unhurried. The narrator felt a quiet contentment in observing how each day blossomed and faded with ease. People seemed more connected to the rhythm of nature, listening to the whisper of the wind or the warmth of the sunlight to sense the passing of time. And yet, despite the beauty of this slow, dreamy existence, there was also a touch of gentle chaos woven into it, a kind that didn't trouble anyone but added a quiet humor to life. Someone might arrive late to a gathering because a cloud had blocked their shadow. Another might oversleep because the rooster felt unusually sleepy that morning. A field worker could return home early, claiming the stars had looked brighter sooner, when in fact it was just a trick of the sky. But such moments didn't bring frustration. Instead, they added soft laughter to the day, blending into the calm rhythm like ripples in a still pond. Time drifted, people drifted with it, and the world remained wrapped in a warm, dreamlike blanket. As night began to deepen and the gentle glow of twilight faded into a soft indigo, the narrator felt the atmosphere settle into an even quieter calm. The stars shimmered with a steady, delicate light, and the village slowly tucked itself into rest. The world before clocks was a place of mild uncertainty, but also a place of peace, a soft, slow world where every moment felt like a gentle breath. And so, in this dreamy world of unreliable shadows, wandering stars, and sleepy roosters, time continued to move in its soft, unpredictable rhythm, untouched by urgency. It was a world guided by nature, by the changing sky, and by the quiet acceptance that perfection wasn't necessary for life to feel warm, calm, and beautifully unhurried. And so, as the old sundial shadow softened into the fading light, the quiet tale drifted onward, moving slowly from the warmth of the sun to the softer, cooler glow of the night sky, where another kind of time waited to be remembered. In the gentle days that drifted before clocks existed, mornings often arrived not with precision, but with a soft, wandering sense of beginning. The world eased into wakefulness as though it were stretching from a long, contented rest. And the people, with no alarms to nudge them awake, rose slowly according to the soft signals offered by nature. A slightly brighter sky, a cooled breath of dawn air, or the faint rustle of birds rearranging themselves upon branches. The narrator drifted quietly through one such morning, observing how the village unfolded like a drowsy, peaceful story. Light spread itself softly across the ground, turning the grass a gentle shade of gold. Shadows stretched long and thin, lying across the paths like sleepy ribbons. They made their subtle shapes on walls and fences, marking the beginning of another day in this world where time was felt rather than measured. People had grown accustomed to using these shadows as friendly guides. Over many generations, they had learned to watch how the sunlight touched the earth, how it shifted and softened as the morning moved forward. When shadows stood tall and stretched far, it was still early. As the sun lifted higher, those shadows slowly tucked into themselves, shrinking into calm little shapes at people's feet. This delicate dance between sun and shadow became one of the earliest ways to understand the time of day. But as reliable as the sun seemed, it also had a quiet sense of mischief. Some mornings, it hid behind clusters of drifting clouds, soft and pale, like cotton brushed across the sky. On these days, shadows disappeared entirely, leaving villagers to guess at when their morning truly began. The narrator noticed how some people shrugged lightly when this happened, continuing their tasks at whatever pace felt right. There was a gentle acceptance in this uncertainty, as though the world had whispered, "It's all right not to know." There were moments when the sun broke through the clouds only briefly, casting sudden bright patches of light on the ground. Shadows reappeared for an instant, stretched thin or short depending on the hour, only to be swallowed again by drifting gray. Watching this made the days feel slightly playful, as though time itself enjoyed a quiet game of hide and seek, and the people, accustomed to such soft unpredictability, moved along with patient ease. Further along the village paths, small wooden posts stood planted in open areas. They were simple objects, but people had placed them deliberately to watch how shadows formed around them. These posts were the earliest versions of sundials, though the people who used them didn't think of them as inventions. They were merely helpful, humble markers in the ground. The sun's slow crawl across the sky painted shifting shadows from these posts, which people used to sense the passing of hours. Yet, the method remained as imprecise as it was gentle. On quiet afternoons, the narrator observed how farmers used these shadows, squinting softly at the light as it settled over their fields. If the shadows fell at a certain angle, they knew it was time to rest, time to eat, or time to begin heading home. But shadows, just like people, had moods of their own. Sometimes they stretched a little differently depending on the season. Sometimes they curved strangely when clouds drifted by, and sometimes they disappeared entirely on days when the sky wore a thick coat of gray. Still, the farmer smiled softly, adjusting as needed. Life in this world unfolded with a slow, soothing flexibility. No one demanded perfect accuracy. No one hurried the day along. Time, like a gentle companion, walked beside them with unhurried steps. Beyond the fields, the narrator wandered toward the edge of a small woodland where sunlight filtered through tall, leafy branches. Inside this green haven, the play of shadows became even more dreamlike. Leaves shimmered with soft movement, scattering bits of light in quiet patterns on the ground. People sometimes used these forest patterns to guess how much daylight remained, though the guesses rarely matched reality. The trees loved to scatter light in unpredictable ways, bending it into shapes that danced and shifted constantly. But the people seemed to enjoy this quiet complexity. Some would pause along the woodland paths, looking up with peaceful curiosity at how the branches created shifting mosaics of brightness and dimness. Even if the woodland shadows offered little accuracy, they brought a soothing beauty to the day, a kind that made guessing the time feel like drifting through a calming dream. As the narrator continued the slow walk through this ancient world, they came upon a small gathering near an open clearing. A few villagers sat together, speaking softly among themselves, observing the sky's gentle transitions. They had an unspoken understanding of how the day moved, not through minutes and seconds, but through the soft cues of nature. The warmth of sunlight, the length of shadows, the color of the sky as it drifted from pale morning to golden afternoon. All these formed the subtle language of time. In this gathering, a young person held a simple wooden stick, pressing it into the earth to watch the shadow form. The child studied the shape with a thoughtful calmness, as though listening to a quiet message from the sun. The narrator watched this moment unfold with warm amusement. The child's shadow studying was no more reliable than anyone else's attempts, yet it carried a kind of sweetness, an innocence that matched the gentle pace of life. The villagers occasionally laughed softly at their own efforts. Someone might claim the day was later than it seemed because their shadow looked shorter than usual. Another would tilt their head, insisting it was still early, simply because the air felt cool. Time became not just a series of moments, but a shared guessing game, wrapped in gentle humor and patient acceptance. There were times when even the animals contributed to this soft confusion. A dog might settle down earlier than expected, prompting people to believe evening was approaching. A group of birds might fly overhead in a pattern that usually aligned with late afternoon, causing villagers to think they were running behind, only to discover that the birds had simply changed their habits that day. The narrator found delight in these small inconsistencies, noticing how they blended seamlessly into the rhythm of this world. Throughout all of this, the overriding feeling was one of calm. Life moved slowly, gracefully. People existed gently inside the flow of daylight, anchored not by measurement, but by sensation. The uncertainty that threaded through their days carried no frustration, only a soft, amused acceptance that time, in its natural form, refused to be pinned down. As the sun continued its quiet path across the sky, casting shifting shapes across the land, the narrator felt a deeper sense of tranquility settle in. This was a world where shadows guided the day, but never perfectly. A world where the sunlight told a story, but in its own drifting, unhurried way. And somehow, this softness made life feel richer, calmer, filled with the kind of warmth that wrapped itself around you like a slow, steady breath. In the gentle hush of this ancient time, people lived not by the crisp ticking of clocks, but by the soft language of sunlight and shadow. And though this language blurred and shifted, it always carried a soothing grace, a gentle reminder that even imperfect rhythms can guide a peaceful life. And when the stars completed their quiet drifting across the heavens, the story continued, gliding gently from the sky above to the small, flickering glow of a single candle, where another way of measuring moments quietly lived. As daylight slowly softened into the early shades of evening, the world before clocks shifted into one of its most serene rhythms. The sky, stretching wide and unhurried, began brushing itself with pale colors, lavender at the edges, rose gold near the horizon, and a sleepy blue settling above the fields. It was a gentle transformation, one that signaled the day was loosening its hold and drifting toward restful dusk. In this time before clocks, evening brought its own quiet ways of understanding the passing hours. People looked upward more often, letting their eyes wander across the sky, reading its changing hues as though it were a slow-moving storybook. The narrator walked softly through the village as this shift unfolded, noticing how the calm atmosphere deepened, how the sounds softened, and how the world seemed to sigh contentedly into the arms of night. When the first stars appeared, shy, small, and scattered, they carried a meaning known to everyone in this ancient world. These early sparkles hinted at the moment when people would begin thinking about supper, about the slow unwinding of the day, and about preparing for a peaceful night. The stars were gentle guides, not strict teachers. They twinkled in soft patterns across the darkening sky, offering hints about the time, but never insisting on precision. Some villagers had learned to read these celestial patterns with quiet familiarity. They knew that when a particular star peaked above the far-off hill, the evening was settling in. When another star drifted into view near the tallest tree, it suggested that night had deepened. And when the sky became a full tapestry of shimmering dots, it meant the hour had grown late. Though how late exactly was anyone's soft guess. Still, there was comfort in this imperfect guidance. The narrator watched as people tilted their heads upward, studying the sky not with urgency, but with a kind of tender curiosity. The stars, after all, had their own steady rhythm. They rose and crossed the sky at their own pace, and the villagers followed that pace as best as they could, often smiling at their own uncertain interpretations. On some evenings, however, clouds drifted in quietly, covering the stars like a gentle blanket drawn across the sky. When this happened, the evening lost its shimmering guideposts, and people simply continued their routines by instinct. The narrator observed how no one seemed troubled by the missing stars. Without clocks to remind them of exact hours, the villagers allowed nature to decide when the night had truly arrived. They listened instead to other quiet cues, the cooling breeze, the soft hum of nocturnal insects, the gentle dimming of light along the fields. But stars were not the only nighttime companions in this world without clocks. As darkness settled more deeply, people turned to simpler, earthly tools, candles, lanterns, and small bowls of oil with floating wicks. These sources of soft, warm light didn't just brighten their homes. They also help people sense the passing of time. A candle, once lit, burned steadily downward. The flame, small and golden, seemed to breathe with a tranquil rhythm. People would watch the gentle melt of wax and note how far the flame had traveled along its length. Some had marked their candles lightly, a faint line here, a tiny scratch there, to remind them how much time each portion represented. Of course, candles never burned exactly the same way. Some flickered more quickly, melting faster in a slight breeze. Others burned slower, protected in quiet corners away from drafts. The narrator watched a family sitting together one evening, gathered around a single candle set in the center of a wooden table. Its flame danced softly, casting warm light across their peaceful faces. They knew from experience that when the flame reached a certain point on the candle, it was time to prepare for bed. But tonight, the flame burned slower than usual, its soft glow lingering lazily. They didn't mind. The world moved gently around them, and their routines adjusted to the candle's sleepy pace. In another home, the narrator observed a different kind of timekeeping, a simple oil lamp glowing steadily within a clay basin. The flame floated on a small wick resting in the oil, slowly consuming the fuel. People could roughly judge the hours by how much oil remained. When the level dipped lower, the night had grown older. Yet even this method carried its quirks. The wick might burn unevenly. The oil might evaporate faster on warmer nights. A gentle wind might cause the flame to dance more brightly, consuming fuel faster than expected. But all these small uncertainties felt like part of the world's quiet charm. No one expected perfection from their candles or lamps. Instead, they treated these lights as companions, gentle guides in the drifting hours of night. The narrator wandered further into the village as the evening deepened. A few people were outside, tending to small lanterns that hung from wooden posts. These lanterns swayed lightly when touched by the night breeze, their warm light flickering in soft rhythms. People sometimes use the lantern's burn time to estimate when the village gates should close or when someone should return home. But lantern flames, just like candle flames, had personalities of their own. Some eager, some slow, some steady, some playful. As the narrator walked through these softly lit spaces, the gentle imperfection of time keeping felt soothing, as though the world had chosen relaxation over precision. The night unfolded with no rigid schedule. Everything moved at the pace of breathing, of flickering, of drifting starlight. The air carried a faint smell of warm wax, of burning oil, of the cool night breeze that threaded between homes and fields like a calming whisper. There were moments in this quiet world when people would gather outside, talking softly beneath the canopy of stars. They might mention how the candle seemed to burn faster than usual that evening, or how the stars appeared later than they expected. Their words carried no worry. Instead, they held a light humor, a gentle acknowledgement that time remained an old friend who enjoyed surprising them. Sometimes, an especially windy night would extinguish candles earlier than expected, leaving people unsure whether the evening was still young or already drifting toward late hours. But even then, rather than relighting the candle immediately, they would listen to the quiet around them, noticing the softness of the air, the stillness of the village, the gentle hum of distant insects. These sensations often told them all they needed to know. And so, in this chapter of subtle starlight and soft candle glow, the narrator saw how people lived in harmony with time, not by controlling it, not by measuring it precisely, but by feeling it, by sensing its presence in the flicker of flames, in the shimmer of stars, and in the gentle drift of night across the land. In this slow, dreamy world, time was everywhere and nowhere at once. A soft, drifting companion that brushed against the edges of life like a quiet, comforting hand. And though it was imperfect in every practical sense, it wrapped the villagers in a warm, peaceful rhythm that made every evening feel like a gentle invitation to rest. As the candle's flame lowered itself into a calm pool of melted wax, the tale drifted forward once more, slipping from warm light into the soft murmur of flowing water, where ancient minds found yet another rhythm of time. As night deepened and the gentle hush of the world pressed softly against the earth, there were quiet corners of ancient life where water became a companion to time. Long before gears clicked or hands circled across a dial, people discovered that water, with its calm, downward flow, could whisper the passing of hours. And in this slowly drifting world, such whispers were enough. The narrator wandered toward the section of the village where a small stream flowed with an unhurried grace. It curved around stones worn smooth by countless quiet nights, moving with a steady murmur that felt almost like breathing. People had always been comforted by this water, its constancy, its softness, its patient journey. Over time, they had learned to use it not just as a resource, but as a gentle guide through their days and nights. In several homes near the stream, people kept simple clay bowls filled with water. Floating on the surface were delicate little markers, tiny pieces of wood or hollowed-out shells, crafted with care. Each one had a small hole in its center, allowing water to seep in slowly. As the bowl's water seeped into the tiny container, the marker would eventually sink. The time it took to sink offered a soft, approximate sense of how long an hour had drifted past. The narrator watched as one family prepared such a bowl for the night. They placed it in a quiet corner of their home, away from drafts or sudden movement. A small shell bobbed gently on the surface, its little hole facing upward. As water slipped through it, grain by grain, the shell grew heavier. People knew roughly how long it should take to reach the bottom. Not exactly, not perfectly, but enough to offer a whisper of passing time. Still, the water clock was never entirely reliable. Some nights, the air grew cooler, slowing the seep of water. Other nights, the shell would tilt just slightly to the side and sink sooner than expected. And sometimes, the water would evaporate faster in the warmth of a lantern, leaving the measurement incomplete. But these gentle inaccuracies were simply part of life, soft reminders that time itself preferred to wander. The narrator could feel the peace that surrounded these quiet rituals. There was something soothing about water, about its slow movement, about the way it adapted to every shape without resistance. People seemed to take inspiration from it, allowing their own lives to flow without the pressure of precision. Elsewhere in the village, another kind of water clock existed, a tall, narrow vessel with a small hole at the bottom. Water trickled out slowly, drop by drop, into a bowl beneath it. People would mark how full the lower bowl grew to estimate the passage of time. It was a simple system, but the sound of the dripping water created an atmosphere of incredible calm. The narrator paused near one of these vessels placed outside a home. The soft, steady drops fell into the lower bowl with a gentle, rhythmic plip, each one sounding like a quiet footstep wandering through the night. The pattern was unhurried, steady, and soothing. Some villagers used this rhythm to lull themselves into sleep, listening to the dripping hours like a bedtime melody. But the rhythm, too, had its playful side. The wooden plug might shift slightly, making the drops fall faster, or the hole might clog with tiny particles, slowing the drip. Sometimes the night's air would carry a faint breeze that caused the water's surface to ripple, sending the droplets in unexpected directions. Yet even these small quirks were met with gentle acceptance. People understood that time, like water, refused to stay completely predictable. The narrator moved through this peaceful night, watching how the village embraced the imperfections of their water clocks. The gentle splashes, the soft glimmers of reflections, the delicate movement of floating shells. All these small details added to the calm rhythm of life. Time was measured not by strict rules, but by nature's quiet intentions. Further along the stream, the narrator saw an older villager sitting on a smooth rock, looking into the water with a thoughtful calmness. This person had spent many years observing the patterns of the stream, how it rose slightly in the rainy season, how it slowed in the heat, how it glimmered differently under moonlight. They had learned to read time in the water's behavior itself, its color, its movement, its reflections. On still nights like this one, when the moon hung low and the air felt clear, the water appeared almost like glass. Its surface held shimmering fragments of moonlit sky, drifting like silver dust across its darkness. The villager watched these reflections, knowing that when they stretched longer across the stream, the night was growing older. When the reflections grew sharper, the moon had risen higher, and when the water turned blacker, absorbing the sky, the night had reached its deepest hours. The narrator admired the serenity of this moment. There is something magical about using nature's quiet artistry to sense the passing of time. Even if imperfect, the reflections offered a dreamlike guide, a soft understanding of night woven through light and shadow. People sometimes placed small floating lanterns onto the stream during certain celebrations or peaceful evenings. These lanterns, shaped like petals or tiny boats, glided gently along the water, carrying warm flames within. As they drifted downstream, villagers would watch their movement to mark a slow passing of minutes. If a lantern made it to a certain bend in the stream, a specific amount of time had likely passed. But the lanterns, too, had their whims. Some floated faster on restless currents. Others rotated lazily in place, caught in hidden eddies. And a few might dim earlier than expected as their small candles flickered out. Yet, these floating lanterns added a kind of dreamlike beauty to the night, glowing specks moving in quiet formation along the water's surface. Watching them felt like observing time itself drifting toward the horizon. The narrator wandered back toward the village center, noticing how the night had deepened. The air felt cooler now, carrying a soft embrace that invited rest. People had begun retreating into their homes, guided by the sinking shells in their bowls or the dripping of their vessels. For those without water clocks, instinct alone was enough. The hush of night, the quieting of sounds, the slow dimming of lanterns, all of these elements blended into a natural clock that the body understood without thinking. In this world without precision, people found comfort in the drifting nature of time. The narrator felt this comfort settle in the air, like a soft blanket drawn gently across the village. The uncertainty of when exactly the next hour might arrive brought no concern. only a peaceful acceptance that life itself was meant to flow without rigid boundaries. Water, in all its forms, taught them to embrace change, to accept that moments seeped through life softly, steadily, and sometimes unpredictably. And so, the villagers allowed the hours to drift as they pleased, trusting that the night would eventually lead them to morning, and morning would guide them gently back to day. And as the final drop of water fell into stillness, the journey moved on, gliding toward those early tools and gentle experiments that shaped how people tried to understand passing hours long before clocks ever existed. Long before gears ticked and minute hands marched around neat little circles, people tried something even more ambitious than taming fire. They tried to make water keep time. Water, the gentlest substance on earth. Water, the calm river. Water, the soothing stream. Water, the thing everyone thought would behave because, well, how messy could it really be? Very messy, it turns out. Because if candles were dramatic, water was a full philosopher, calm on the surface, unpredictable underneath, and absolutely uninterested in being measured. The beautiful idea. People in ancient lands believed water flowed at a steady, graceful pace. So they invented something called a water clock, or clepsydra, a beautiful bowl with a tiny hole near the bottom. Water dripped out slowly. As the level dropped, time was said to pass. A simple idea, a peaceful idea. Everyone liked it. Even the bowl seemed happy about it. For exactly 8 minutes. After that, water began proving that it had no intention of working consistently. Temperature, the first enemy. The villagers discovered something almost immediately. Warm water flowed faster. Cold water flowed slower. On winter mornings, the water clock barely dripped at all. It simply shivered silently inside the bowl, refusing to move. People would sit around the bowl, staring at it, waiting for a single drop to fall. One child claimed she saw the water thinking very hard. An elder said it was being stubborn. A farmer sniffed and said, "It's frozen in spirit." No one truly knew. On hot days, the water rushed out as if late for an appointment. It dripped so fast that the villagers declared it rude and inconsiderate. The entire bowl emptied before they had finished arguing about it. The water never apologized. The bowl problem. Soon, people realized the bowl mattered just as much as the water. Wide bowls drained differently than narrow bowls. Deep bowls drained differently than shallow bowls. Some bowls were carved too smooth. The water slipped through too eagerly. Others were rough. The water clung to the sides like a shy guest refusing to leave a party. One craftsman made a beautifully carved water clock, decorated with swirling patterns, tiny fish, and delicate petals. The village admired it greatly. It didn't work. The carved lines trapped little drops of water, making them slide slower and slower until the entire timing system collapsed. People watched in silence as the last bits of water curled into decorative grooves, confidently ignoring the laws of time. The craftsman sighed. At least it looked pretty. The borrowed water disaster. One year, the village experienced a drought. They didn't want to waste valuable drinking water in the timekeeping bowls, so they used water from the river instead. This turned out to be a terrible decision. River water brought friends. Tiny leaves, floating dust, little bits of soil. A brave insect who rode in like a tiny pirate captain. The debris clogged the hole in the bottom of the bowl. A single leaf got stuck, blocking the flow completely. time officially stopped. For 3 full hours, the villagers believed the day was still morning. Meanwhile, the insect, the pirate, walked around proudly inside the bowl, thoroughly enjoying his new kingdom. The elder stared into the bowl and whispered, "We have lost control." He was correct. The Great Spillage Incident. One evening, during a quiet gathering, the water clock sat in its place on a tall wooden stand. Everyone watched it with the usual mix of admiration and suspicion. Then someone sneezed. Just a normal sneeze. A medium sneeze. But somehow, it shook the wooden stand. The bowl wobbled. The bowl wobbled again. And then, in what felt like slow motion, the bowl tipped. Water spilled everywhere. People gasped. Chairs scraped. A dog barked. The elder dramatically held his forehead. A single villager whispered, "Time has fallen." And indeed it had, because the moment the water hit the floor, the village officially had no idea what time it was anymore. Some thought it was early afternoon. Some thought it was close to evening. One person insisted it was Wednesday, it was Monday. Chaos reigned until sunset. A quiet truth emerges. After countless mishaps, villagers everywhere reached a gentle conclusion. Water cannot be trusted. It flowed differently in every season. It responded to sun, shade, warmth, cold, dust, insects, bowl shapes, and sneezes. It flowed more like a dream than a measurement. And maybe that was the problem. Water wasn't meant to be watched. It was meant to be followed. Still, watching a water clock was a strangely peaceful activity. People would gather around as droplets fell one by one, making small rippling sounds. They would talk softly, letting the rhythm calm their thoughts. Children would fall asleep listening to the tiny tap, tap, tap of dripping water. Sometimes, the villagers suspected the water wasn't measuring time. It was slowing it down. And maybe that was its secret gift. The soft lesson of the water clock. Even though the water clock failed more than it succeeded, it left behind a gentle lesson. Some things cannot be rushed. Some things cannot be controlled. Some things, like water, like life, must simply be allowed to flow. Today, with our glowing digital screens and precise clocks, it's easy to forget how patiently ancient people waited for those drops to fall. How they listened, how they breathed, how they slowed down with the water. And in those moments of waiting, even if the water never agreed with them, they found a kind of soft, drifting peace. A peace that moved like a quiet stream under moonlight. Uncertain, unpredictable, but beautifully alive. And when those early inventions settled in a quiet memory, the story continued its slow, peaceful walk, moving into a softer reflection on how all these fragile attempts at keeping time slowly led the world towards something steadier. Time in the ancient world had drifted through many shapes: shadows, stars, candles, water, each one attempting, in its own quiet way, to mark the passing of moments. But all of them, every single method, shared a gentle flaw. They simply did not work very well. And yet life continued, softly, slowly, dreamily, in its own wandering rhythm. By the time the final era of pre-clock timekeeping arrived, people had begun trusting the simplest guide of all, the sky itself. It had always been there, after all. It rose, it set, it shifted, it glowed in steady ways. It offered light, dimness, calmness, and cues for sleep. So the people decided, gently and without ceremony, that the sky would be the last clock they relied on. Not because it was precise, it wasn't. Not because it was clear, it definitely wasn't, but because it was vast, peaceful, and free from human attempts to control it. And in some strange, comforting way, that made it perfect. The soft, sky-colored clock. People began waking not to numbers or ticks, but to the color of morning mist. A pale blue meant it was early. A warmer glow meant the day had stretched into something brighter. A faint gold touching the edges of the world meant the sun was preparing to arrive. It wasn't exact, but it felt right. Travelers read the sky when they walked. Farmers watched the skies when they planted. Children looked up at the clouds drifting like sleepy pillows and guessed, often incorrectly, what part of the day it was. A few insisted they were experts at reading sky time, though they were usually wrong in charming, cheerful ways. One man claimed he could tell the exact hour by the tilt of a passing cloud. It drifted sideways when he said it was noon. It was actually early morning. He smiled anyway, and people smiled with him, because at last, time was no longer something to argue about. It was simply something to witness. The birds who confused everyone. People also listened to birds. The morning birds had their songs. The afternoon birds had their slower rhythms. The evening birds made sounds that felt like the world dimming itself. But birds, being birds, didn't follow schedules. Sometimes the morning birds overslept. Sometimes the evening birds sang too early. Sometimes all the birds decided to sing together at once, creating what sounded like a gentle but decisive musical disagreement. Villagers would stand outside, hands on their hips, heads tilted upward, trying to decode this feathered confusion. One elder sighed. "The birds are off by a whole hour today." A younger villager replied, "Or maybe we are." And so they let the birds sing when they pleased. The sky mistake that almost became a holiday. Once a thick morning fog rolled in and stayed for the entire day. People believed it was dawn for 13 consecutive hours. No one worked. No one traveled. No one argued about time because time had entirely disappeared. Children played, thinking it was still early. Adults brewed morning tea again and again. A shepherd led his flock out 3 separate times, puzzled each time by how oddly lingering the morning seemed. It wasn't until late evening, when the fog thinned just enough to reveal a faint moon, that the truth emerged. The day had passed already. Someone declared, "That was a wonderful day of mourning." Someone else agreed, "We should do that every year." And so the villagers celebrated the day of endless dawn whenever the world gifted them another long fog. When people finally stopped trying, after so many centuries of creative attempts to measure the day, the people eventually reached a soft, peaceful conclusion. Time did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be felt. They realized that life was already happening moment by moment, whether they measured it or not. They realized the sky knew more about rhythm than any tool they could carve. They realized the sun rose in its own way, warmed the world in its own way, and settled down in its own way, without ever checking a clock. So why hurry? Why chase? Why measure so sharply? The people let time become something gentle again, something lived, something witnessed, something that flowed like a drifting cloud or a quiet river. And this subtle shift, this easing, became the soft foundation for the peaceful evenings that followed. The age of quiet waiting. As the era stretched on, villages became experts in the art of slow evenings. They sat outside their homes, watching the sky darken shade by shade, never once wondering what hour it technically was. The cool air settled softly over fields. The last blue faded into velvet. Lanterns glowed like tiny, individual suns. Children grew quiet. Pets curled near warm doorways. The world hushed itself gently, like a blanket being pulled across the day. Time wasn't something that ticked anymore. It was something that breathed. And because it breathed, people breathed too. Slower, deeper, calmer. The dreamlike realization. One evening, during a moment of rare stillness, an elder looked up at the sky, its stars shimmering faintly like whispered ideas. "It's funny," he murmured softly, though no one answered. For all the ways we try to hold on to time, it was always holding us. Not tightly, not strictly, just gently, guiding them through mornings and afternoons and evenings with the simplicity of a shifting sky. In that quiet moment, it seemed everyone understood. The old systems had barely worked, but maybe that was the point, because life had never asked to be counted so precisely. It had only asked to be lived slowly and kindly. The soft ending. And so the final era of pre-clock timekeeping became one of soft surrender. People woke with the sky. They ate when they felt hungry. They rested when their eyes grew heavy. They slept when the stars whispered that the world had dimmed enough. Time was no longer measured. It was simply experienced. A glow, a shift, a feeling. And even now, in a world filled with exact seconds and glowing screens, the memory of that gentle era lingers quietly. A reminder that not every moment needs to be perfect. Not every hour needs to be caught. Not every day needs to be measured to be meaningful. Some days are meant to drift. Some evenings are meant to soften. Some nights are meant to lull us into sleep the same way ancient people once drifted into theirs, slowly, calmly, wrapped in the quiet rhythm of sky that never needed a clock to tell time. And with that gentle truth, the story settles. Softly, like dusk settling over a peaceful world, ready to guide the listener into their own quiet rest. And now, as all these old methods grow dim like distant campfires at the edge of history, the tale moves gently into its final quiet place, where everything becomes soft, simple, and ready for rest. And now, as the story fades into the quiet of the night, the old shadows, stars, candles, and drifting water grow still once more. Time no longer needs to be measured, only felt gently and slowly like your own calm breathing. Let your thoughts settle. Let your body grow heavier. Let the night hold you. May sleep come softly the way evening always has. Unhurried, peaceful, and warm. Good night.